Beyond, the AMA version of it. I'm going to be just shortly introducing our speakers to you guys. I'm Paridhi, co-founder of MBA and Beyond, and we do this week on week to facilitate meaningful conversations between alums and students of top business schools and the aspirants, you guys who are trying to get into some of the top business schools. Today, we are bringing to you the best of both the worlds, our consultants from INSEAD and Harvard. I'm just going to hand over the mic to them to introduce themselves, while let me walk you through how the flow of conversation tonight is going to look like. We are going to be spending the first 20-25 minutes just discussing some pressing questions that we get asked a lot, or our consultants get asked a lot, with respect to the applications, which entails GMAT score, what is a good enough GMAT score, international exposure, how should you come up with a strong, authentic narrative, what should you really be focusing on when it comes to standing out in a very global competitive pool. How should you pick schools, so on and so forth. These are going to be some of the topics that we're going to be touching upon. And as the questions come through to you, feel free to drop them in the chat window here or raise your hands. And we are happy to welcome you and ask any questions to me at any point in time. The next 30 minutes are going to be all about you, whatever questions you've dropped here or you were raising your hands for. We're going to be doing a one-on-one with all of you. Before we start, it'll be interesting to just drop in the chat the kind of schools that you're targeting for and the rounds that you're targeting. So it'll also help us, modulate the conversation in the direction for what you guys are seeking. So feel free to ask any questions about the application process, about MBA and Beyond, because I'm aware some of you are really looking to work with our consultants, and potentially Praveg and Cyrus are going to be your consultants if you're coming on board at MBA and Beyond. Thanks for listening to me for so long. I'm going to hand over the stage to Praveg to take a moment to introduce himself. Welcome to coffee, Praveg. Over to you.
So thanks, Paridhi. So hi, everyone. Praveg here. Just as a bit of introduction, I am originally from India. I did my undergrad in Hong Kong in computer science, worked for a couple of years in Hong Kong at JP Morgan, so pretty much in the financial services space, and then decided to go for an MBA. So got into INSEAD, did a year worth of MBA over there, and I'm currently based in London, where I'm working with Bain & Company as a management consultant. So, again, a very brief history over the last 10 years of my life. But yeah, over to you, Cyrus.
Thanks, Praveg. Over to you, Cyrus.
Hey, guys. Yes, my name is Cyrus. I've been with MBA and Beyond for a few months. I don't know how long, actually, 6 months. I went to HBS for my MBA. I graduated last year, May 2022. Before that, I was a sales engineer, actually, at Salesforce for 3 years in London. And sorry, did you mention undergrad as well? My undergrad was in aerospace engineering at Imperial College.
Ooh, that's so from aerospace engineering, you land yourself at Salesforce. And
yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So guys, you got people from the US, London, I sit in Amsterdam, and I know all of you are spread across the globe right now, while I see majority coming from India. So you're joining us really late. I know this is not a coffee time for you. So whatever you're enjoying, whether it's wine, a beer, or whatever, let's enjoy the session together. And I'm going to start the session with a very interesting question and getting insight from the best of both the worlds, like we say, Harvard and INSEAD. So why did Praveg, you and Cyrus choose the schools that you chose to go for an MBA, or you just applied to a bunch of schools and that's where you got admitted? So let's talk about your journey a little bit. Maybe Praveg, Cyrus, anybody can go first.
Praveg, you want to go first?
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So why did I choose INSEAD and why did I choose an MBA? So I think let me just answer the second question first in terms of why did I think an MBA was the right choice for me. So again, I was in Hong Kong. I was working in the financial services sector. I had a good idea of what technology looked like, as well as I had spent a bit of time in the talent function and human resources as well. And that is exactly when I felt that I was getting a little siloed in the functions that I was working in the geography that I was working on. And I really wanted to change, you call these the three big things that you intend to change when you go for an MBA: the geography, the function, and the industry. And usually, if you want to change two out of these three things, then yes, an MBA is a good idea for you. For me, I was a little more kind of adventurous, and I intended to change all three for me. Did not know if it would be a success or not. But yeah, keeping that in mind, I decided that yes, given the fact that I have almost 4 to 5 years of work experience under my belt, and I do want to kind of move from the tech side of things to more of a business side of things, essentially moving to more of how things are done, more towards why things are done, and understanding that from a business perspective. That's essentially when I thought that an MBA would make the most sense for me. Now, the question was, of course, which MBA school should I choose, and why INSEAD was the one that I went for. So one of the constraints for me was that I was super keen on going for a 1-year MBA program and not a 2-year one, because I felt that the opportunity cost is a little too high for me in terms of, I don't want to kind of forego on my salary for 2 years. Instead, I just want to get that business acumen in, go for a fast track program, and get back into the employment sector. So that's why I was only looking at 1-year programs. And then was a question of geography. So for me, I kind of was looking forward to living and working in the UK or in Europe for the longer term, primarily because of the fact that I wanted to explore that side of the world, having been in Asia for almost 25, 26 years. And secondly, I was also aiming to look at permanent residency as a pathway to kind of settle into a country. Keeping that in mind, I completely discounted the US because it wasn't an easy pathway, especially given the immigration laws over there. And that's essentially how I kind of eliminated all the other options and kind of fixated on INSEAD and being in Europe as kind of like my target school, which checked all the boxes. And also, given that it had a January intake, meant that I can also be part of some internship. That kind of really checked all of the boxes for me. And that's how I decided that, okay, INSEAD is the ideal MBA school for me.
Thanks a lot, Pravik. That was really insightful. And I think you covered all the aspects. While it was surprising that you wanted to pivot all three. And we're going to come to the point, I don't know if you talked about it in your application or not, because as a standard practice, as we all advise that we should try and limit ourselves to 2, but we'll come to that later. So Cyrus, over to you. Why did we pick MBA, Harvard Business School? Go ahead.
Yeah, so look, I went to engineering school and then I realized I didn't want to be an engineer. So it was tough to, go and be anything else with an aerospace engineering degree. It was kind of overkill. So I kind of told, I thought in the back of my mind at some point I'm going to quote balance it out with a more commercial degree. Now I thought maybe a 1-year program, MSc, whether an MBA, something different. So that was kind of the basis. It was more just like getting the right education for the long-term aspiration that I had. That was more around like managing perhaps a company or being in investing, which I am right now. So something like that. That was one thing. And then the second was, well, then where do I want to go and do it? Because I was always living in Europe, actually. I thought, well, actually, I should also balance out the geography and go somewhere new. So then I felt like the US actually for me was the only place to consider, just because, and this is also why I think business school choice is so personal, because there's different business cases depending on who you are. And yeah, so the US and for me was literally the only place I applied. And then the Harvard was like, well, I thought I had a few reasons around Harvard. I think for me, one was as a very academic guy, I was always impressed by the fact that that's where most of management research originates from. And maybe less so nowadays, but at least historically, it's been like the hub of management research. Like some of the most famous thinkers are from there. So I thought, fantastic. Like I'm going to be really at the heart of where, leadership research is. And then the second thing is I felt like it was the most balanced class. I really wanted to meet people of different like backgrounds. And I felt like some of the other schools I was targeting were very focused on one particular sector, which is great. But also I was really trying to find a class that was large and balanced. And so Harvard's class is like 900 people. And there is like entrepreneurs, there is PE bros, there's like a bunch of different like people. So it's great to have that. And I said finally, I was also obviously influenced by the fact that I had some friends who were like alumni of the school. So obviously I had firsthand like feedback, and I could see how much like strength of the identity of the school there was, and how well people connected after graduation. And I felt like I really wanted that too.
Amazing. That's so I see a lot of common between both your situations as well, like from Europe to US. Praveen, you'd been in Asia for a really long time, and geography as a pivot is a classic for most people. While we were talking about the 3-point pivot, Praveen, I'm going to just quickly flash my screen, share my screen, and talk about the same a little bit on what we advise. So when we're going to be talking about our goals in our application, while of course this is a candidate who is just brainstorming on their short-term goals right now, there are going to be 3 aspects of it that you're going to be highlighting to applications or admissions committee. The first one is going to be domain industry, the second one is function, and the third one is going to be location. In an ideal situation, to make a strong application and a strong foundation for your application, in your heart, you may want to switch all 3, like Pravik also wanted to, but we do advise to stick to maximum 2. So for most of you, I know you are going to say location is going to happen for sure. You're going to move from India to US to UK to Europe, wherever you are, or you're going to be switching geographies. Then you may want to switch between a function and domain or industry. You can try to do a little bit of PNCs and see which one is falling or positioning you in the best, unique way to a business school. And that's where a consultant really helps you identify which one looks most unique in your particular case. So any 2 cents, Pravik, Cyrus, you've got for our candidates to start thinking on how should they approach thinking about their short-term goals. We're not even talking about midterm, long-term goals.
Well, actually, I think the short-term goals come from the long-term goals. So you have to think about everything at the same time, in my view. And I think there's 2 things. I think first of all, you have to present a coherent story to people, to the admissions committee, and then to yourself. And to do that, you have to do a lot of thinking, I think, of like what your strengths are as a person. What I did was I did a SWOT of me. And I think that works pretty well in terms of knowing, being very realistic about who you are. Because if you're not, then you're just delaying the problem when recruitment comes 2 years later at the end of school. So you might as well just be clear now about like what is the intersection of what you're good at and what you love, and then build a plan around that for the long term. And then once you have the long term, then it's much simpler to think, okay, what is the short term goal that I have to achieve in order to get there? It might be that because you're a veteran, you want to go to consulting to get more business experience before launching your business. But every person would have their own. But I think it's important, I think, from the get-go to think about like a long-term plan that is coherent.
Yeah, Cyrus, I mean, I completely agree. Just on top of what you said, I think a common mistake that I've seen that applicants usually make when they tackle these MBA applications is directly dive into the essays and start writing about their short-term goals, long-term goals, what are their career objectives, without really, giving a lot of time towards understanding what their strengths, weaknesses are, and essentially what the opportunity is for them to pursue an MBA. So I feel that there is this entire stage that actually comes before you even start your application, thinking about you as a person, what your overarching career objective is. And from that, you kind of, think about your entire journey in terms of where you currently are, what your expertise is, how an MBA will add on to that expertise. And in order to achieve your overarching long-term career objective, where do you want to be right after your MBA? So it should be kind of like a coherent and a very smooth story, which brings you, which kind of to the reader from the admission committee takes on a journey from where you were, say a few years back, all the way till where you foresee yourself 10 years from now, which is essentially your long-term career objective.
Absolutely. And just chiming in to what Pravik Cyrus said, there are going to be a lot of elements to your story, which is not just your goals. It's strengths, achievements, weaknesses, failures, international exposure, your extracurricular, social impact, bunch of other things. We're going to come back, touch upon one aspect in a little bit, which is going to be a weakness aspect of it, which we're going to be talking about in a bit. But before that, we're going to touch upon an interesting aspect which people get confused about and do not get the right answers from the markets by talking to consultants or even alums sometimes is international exposure or international experience, and something that we really consider as an essential aspect when you're applying to some of the top schools, including INSEAD. So a question, maybe Praveg, you can help clear these doubts for our audience. What do schools really mean by international exposure? And how can we potentially bring it out if there are any myths around it that you can bust? So let's talk a little bit about international experience.
Sure. Yeah. No, happy to do that, Pardeep. So there are, of course, a lot of myths in terms of what international experience means. And the most common one is that, okay, international experience essentially means me going out of my home country and getting an experience of working with an organization outside of my home country, which is true. It is incredibly, valuable to have this experience, but international experience does not stop over here. Where it also extends into, and that is exactly how I want to kind of bust this myth which exists around international experience. It is also valuable for the admission committee. For instance, if you have traveled even from a leisure perspective to multiple countries around the world, even in terms of spending a few days out of your home country in another part of the world, another continent, that as well is international experience that really enriches your application a lot. And even if, of course, there are people who haven't really stepped out of their home country, but instead they have an experience working with people coming from another country or from very diverse backgrounds, even that does count as international experience. Essentially, the idea or, what the admission committee really wants to know from you when they ask you about international experience is to understand how well do you work with people coming from multiple different backgrounds, and essentially touching on the point of diversity. How well do you interact with people coming from different backgrounds, or how well do you understand people who are coming from very different backgrounds as compared to what you might come from? And if you can portray that element from your experience, be it traveling outside of your home country or working with people coming from various different countries and continents, then that would kind of solve what exactly is the admission committee looking from this particular question when they ask you about international experience.
Absolutely.
I don't have a ton to add, to be honest. I think I give a pretty thorough answer.
That's great. So I'm aware that INSEAD does ask one of the ethic questions revolve around international experience, while Cyrus, Harvard does not very specifically put it out there. Do you also think that Harvard is looking for something like international exposure in candidates, or that's not even a criteria?
I don't think it's a criteria, really. I think most schools just want to see what opportunities you were given in your life and what you did with them. I think that's like that's the story you want to tell. So yeah, if you've had the opportunity to get an international experience and you took it, awesome. If you didn't, well then that's you have to find a way to justify it. But I think it's more from that lens than, because otherwise then you're biasing against people whose life circumstances didn't necessarily allow them, right, to get international experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to a global school with people from different, cultures, and you need to be adaptable. And I think that's what schools are looking for. Like, how as leaders are we open to the perspectives of the world? And I very clearly know at INSEAD, they try to make a cohort of the most conflicting countries coming together, like sitting next to each other. And then they try to, of course, create scenarios where you have to debate with each other while also embrace the perspectives. So absolutely. Thanks a lot for great insights, guys. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is GMAT GRE. I'm aware some of us are reattempting, some of us haven't taken it, but we're thinking about round 2. We do not know what is the right time to start, what is a good start, what is a good score to go with. So the question that's been posed to us is, what's considered as a good GMAT GRE score when it comes to top schools like INSEAD, M7, LBS in Europe, and schools that are ranked in top 20? What advice would you offer to candidates who are targeting top MBA programs but have lower GMAT scores? So both of you, anyone, 2 cents.
Sorry, you said the questions are what are good scores, how to prepare, and
So the first part is, let's tackle the first part. What is considered as a good GMAT or a GRE score for a top school?
I mean, I think the usual benchmark is like 700 plus. I think is like the great scores, but I tend to, yeah, I think 700 is like the benchmark I try to set for people, so you can, you can be at ease. But I've heard of people with 670, 680, 690 do well too. I don't feel like that's necessarily and something that kind of cancels you out.
Yeah, I swear to that. Like just now, 6:30, a candidate with us made it to INSEAD. So I'm always scared to give a right or wrong answer, and there's no right or wrong answer, to be honest, for this question. But we do get asked a lot.
Yeah.
Pravik, do you have any 2 cents to this?
Yeah, exactly. No, completely echoing what Cyrus and Pardeep said. I think there's no right answer to it in terms of what is the best GMAT or GRE score. It really depends on a lot of functions. For instance, it is a function of what school or what geography you're targeting. For instance, if you're targeting the US primarily, then yes, the US schools are a little more selective when it comes to, or competitive, if I can say, when it comes to the GMAT score as compared to the European schools. So that is one, parameter or a factor that should come into the mix. The second one is, of course, if we talk about European schools, they definitely have a way higher focus on the essays and the entire narrative that you're portraying. And you might actually see that these European schools actually ask you for way more essays as compared to the US schools in multiple instances. And this is actually the reason. So of course, they do have a minimum kind of threshold for a GMAT score, which again, it's not public knowledge, but I feel it's super low as such. But then they do look at the holistic profile of the person. And as Parthi said that, even a person with the 630 score was able to get into INSEAD, which only tells me that the person's profile was, the entire narrative that the person had was so clear in terms of what the person wanted to do, that they were able to justify them going for an INSEAD MBA through their entire story. And hence their low GMAT score did not pose as a hindrance for them. So again, my advice over here would essentially be, of course, there is this, I mean, you want to kind of reattempt your GMAT, try to get the best score possible, but then really also kind of play into the mix the time that you have, for instance, of the upcoming rounds. I know that round 2 is, I think just around the corner. And so don't look at your application just as the GMAT score in itself. It is just one of the element and not the entire application. What is more important, especially from a European school perspective, is your entire narrative, your essays. What story are you portraying in front of the admission committee? The GMAT only strengthens your entire application, but is not the only deciding factor.
100%.
Yeah, I'm going to just quote a story here of one of our applicants who actually went from 620 to 730 over a span of 8 months. And that's the kind of patience of taking GMAT every month, like reattempting. She was reattempting. She's at Fuqua right now. I think she also got placed in Bain, Pravik, after that. So she graduated in the US. So she was working with us throughout the year while she wasn't able to get a good score. But she was like, okay, this is going to be a part of the journey. While I work out 9 kick-ass applications, I'm going to keep reattempting, and I'm still going to push the submit button. So I think she was submitting an early action round application for Columbia and Fuqua, and just 2 days prior to that, she did not even tell us. She was attempting it like another time, and maybe 5 times she did not let us know, and she ended up getting a 730. So my advice to all the candidates there is, while of course there should be a minimum threshold that you should be comfortable telling yourself that I am going to get this, or I am scoring this in mocks, but that shouldn't be a criteria for holding yourself back from thinking out great applications, great narrative or something. And it does not have to happen sequentially. While of course essays can wait, but your overall narrative, your story, your branding, strengths, weaknesses, we're going to jump onto weaknesses in a bit, that should already start. You should be brainstorming with your mentor, with your consultant, with your friends. All the time you should be thinking about what's the story that you're really putting out there. And that has nothing to do with your GMAT score at this moment. That's what I would say. While be realistic, yes, depending on the schools that you're applying to, you need to get a decent score. Thanks, both of you, for that advice. And I see a lot of questions coming in. Maybe we can answer this one because this is something that we get asked. And despite doing so many articles on it and so many sessions on it, and I know there is a myth around it, do schools have a preference between GRE and GMAT when evaluating applications? Pravek, Cyrus, do you have any insights, thoughts on this? Otherwise,
Sure.
yeah.
Probably do you want to go first? I can go first otherwise.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go first. I think, I mean, in terms of preference, of course, they don't really share anything publicly in terms of they prefer something. Of course, they are taking in both the numbers, but I think what we need to understand over here is that these are just kind of exams or a score that kind of puts you in a particular bracket for these schools in terms of, yes, this is your, this is how smart you are, this is your knowledge level in terms of how good you are with English, how good we are with quant, etc. And both GRE and GMAT do the exact same job of providing this number to these to the admission committee. So from my perspective, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Parthi and Cyrus, it does not really make a lot of difference if you go for GMAT or the GRE. It really depends on which exam are you more comfortable in. Because of course, I know one has a more focus on quant versus the other has a more focus on verbal. So it really is up to you in terms of which one you want to take. What I would say is just be sure of the range that you are targeting in terms of the schools that you have in mind, because of course you'll need to kind of realistically have a minimum threshold for both the GMAT and the GRE when you are attempting the exams. But yeah, overall, I don't think there is any specific preference that schools tend to share.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. There's a bias that people have towards the GMAT because they feel like it's become a household name. But by and large, it's just take the exam that you're comfortable with and just do the best. Better to have a higher GRE score than a lower GMAT score. And just, again, I think we just have to, highlight Pravek's previous point on it being a holistic view of who you are. So just, do your best at one of these exams and then move on to telling a great story.
Absolutely. Whatever you're comfortable with, guys. And there have been situations when, let's say, we've seen candidates preparing for GMAT for like half a month or a month, and then they realize that they're really better off taking GRE. So they've switched from one over the other. But it depends the time of the year you're doing this. If you're doing this right now and you've already been preparing for, let's say, GMAT for 2 months or 1.5 months, then it's not advisable if you're targeting round 2. So gauge what part of the year you're making that decision. Are you doing it in the beginning before you're even starting the preparation? Try to do the mocks or let's say the diagnostics for both of them and see which one suits you better, and then try and understand the exam a little more and then go ahead with it. While there is another question that Ritvik is asking, which is about executive assessment. So he's asking EA scores instead of GMAT for CBS and Stern. I'm 100% not sure whether for regular MBA, CBS and Stern will accept an EA score unless they have rolled out a new announcement or something. But some schools have a preference of GRE and GMAT over EA scores for regular MBA. They do not even give you an option. So it depends what program you're really applying for. And if the school is accepting of it. If they're accepting of it, I don't think they will make a preference of one score over the other, unless Pravek, Cyrus, you have another idea on any other thing to add here. Okay. Great. So let's talk about the weaknesses. So when B School asks you about your weaknesses, what do you think they are really looking for? Cyrus, do you want to throw some light on that?
Yeah, of course. I think there you have to strike a right balance. Like, I think this is business school. So they're looking for your strengths in business and your weaknesses in business as a leader. So I feel like you have to, on the one hand, shy away from the, typical weaknesses that people say, like, I work too hard, I can't say no, I'm, like this kind of stuff. I feel like is just too generic. Even if it is you, like, it's just too generic. But and on the other hand, they don't want to hear about your personal mistakes also. I shouldn't have broken up with my girlfriend or this type of stuff. So it's really focused on, like, things as a leader that you want to improve at school. So is it conflict management? Is it perhaps presentation skills? Is it ability to manage upwards? Is it perhaps coaching, whether upwards or downwards in the hierarchy? Is it perhaps sales, sales and just like the whole skill set around that? Focus on things like that. And I feel like what I tell my applicants often when we're doing this exercise, because it is a needed exercise, is to think about every time your manager has given you constructive feedback, or anytime you've had to do something and you felt like it was a little bit outside of your comfort zone. It's something you submitted and you didn't feel confident. These are usually the areas where you're not as strong. So these are, as a result, the areas where you can, dig for potential weaknesses. Definitely go there, and you have a good set of elements to talk about on your interview too.
Absolutely. Pravik, anything
No, I
you'd
think
like
that was spot on, Cyrus. Nothing to add as such. Completely echo that.
Yeah. So I'd just like to add one thing to what Cyrus said. They're looking to make you into a leader, and that's what you're also going to a business school for. So when you're going to be putting your application together, you're basically going to be positioning yourself as a global business leader who's going to be solving a real world problem. And that's where like your whole story from long term to mid term to short term to why MBA, you're going to backtrace it with collinear, like really collinearity wise, it has to be all connected. You need to position all your strengths, weaknesses, achievements in a structure that frames or draws one single line. So when you're thinking of global leadership, what Cyrus said, think about what challenges do global leaders face, and then potentially you can see how you have experienced yourself having those, whatever you have, and how you also overcame them at some point, or maybe not, and that can act as a gap in your profile, which you can say an MBA can help you bridge as well. So it could either be used as showcasing like a strong failure that has completely transformed you, or something that can be presented as a gap that an MBA can help you bridge to come up with an answer for why MBA. So you need to come up with weaknesses which you can use in different ways throughout the application. So all right, then let's move on to the next one. And we've got questions coming in also in the private chat. We're going to be tackling that in another 2 to 3 minutes, guys. Just bear with us. The next question is, what role do you think an introspection plays in building a good narrative for candidates? Maybe Pravik, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think massive role. As I mentioned earlier, right? Instead of diving straight into writing your essays when you are thinking about your short-term and long-term goals, it's always better to kind of introspect on who you are as a person. As Cyrus mentioned, he did a SWOT analysis on himself, which is a great tool. I feel you understand what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and where they are stemming from. It was just I'll give you an example. I was just working with this applicant a few days ago, and he was facing a little bit of trouble understanding what the short-term goal should be to achieve the career objective that he set out. And when we were just introspecting on his entire life story, the different strengths, weaknesses, where do the weaknesses actually stem from? So there was a weakness around crisis management. And on further probing, we learned that there was this personal incident in his life because of which this weakness developed. And that incident actually came out as the driving force or the motivation factor behind setting up a short-term goal for that applicant, for that particular applicant. Essentially bridging that gap on crisis management through an MBA and really looking at crisis as a driving factor, essentially going into something called business turnaround consulting, helping companies manage crisis in a better way, that kind of formulated as that person's short and long-term goal. And the way he got onto realizing what this goal was by conducting a very deep introspection on, yes, there are these strengths and weaknesses that I have, but where do these actually stem from? And this as a process is, I think, extremely critical before you dive into writing your essays. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Cyrus.
No, I was only agreeing. I was saying that literally I don't think there can be an MBA application without introspection.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm going to again share my screen just to walk our applicants through, or potential applicants, to understand at what point does the essay writing actually come into picture when you're working on your MBA application. So you see like 9 steps on your screen, which I'm flashing right now. The school selection actually happens on step 6. While what Pravik is just now talking about is step 3 for us after getting to know your personality a little bit and mapping you with your consultant. The bit that happens is actually thinking and talking about your goals, your strengths, your weaknesses, failures, things that I've just walked you through. And there's a specific section for this. This has to come from you. Nobody can write it for you. This is to be brain dumped from your life experiences, which only you are aware of. And once you do that, only then a consultant is able to pull off a strong positioning of a brand for you for any business school. So this framework has to be followed. Some people tend to spend just 7 days on this, depending on how much clarity you have with respect to what goals you want to accomplish, what gaps do you have in your profile. Some people really spend a month on this activity or this exercise. So depending on wherever you are in your thought process with respect to how do you want to pitch yourself, these are the elements that you have to brain dump first. And only then a consultant starts talking about how can you position, what are the schools where you have good chances with or without a good GMAT score right now. You could be you having an impressive story, but a bad GMAT score. And a consultant might tell you, take a shot at LBS, take a shot at INSEAD, but we cannot tell you that just by a 30-minute conversation or 1-hour conversation where we do in profile evaluation. We really have to know layers underneath you to understand what is that we can really pull off to showcase to a school that can really mesmerize them. So introspection is something where you start, and introspection is a thing that I'm sure you guys are still doing, and that's the whole point of having this conversation. So we all start thinking about our journey. I think we can tackle this question from Shweta before we take the last question. Shweta, I just spoke to on a call before we started this session, so we're going to tackle that when she's checking. And I think, Pravik, you can help us answer this. Quick question. Do MBB firms still require GMAT scores for candidate applications? And does a low GMAT score hurt one's chances with MBB? Please, Pravik, thoughts on that?
All right. Now, the reason I laughed is because this is one of the top questions that you get even during the MBA. That once you've thought that okay, the GMAT is now behind, but that it continues to haunt you. But no, actually, to be very honest, for MBBs, it does not matter. If you have a decent score, which you would have if you make it to your MBA program, then no, it will not matter to the MBBs in terms of what your GMAT score is. Is it high? Is it low? There is no minimum threshold as such. I wouldn't disagree that there was a time where it used to be the case that, they used to look at a minimum of 700, especially McKinsey. But in the current scenario, they do not look at your GMAT score at all. What they look at is entirely your profile, where you are in your entire career trajectory, how well can you position yourself for the MBBs, and how well of a consultant can you be, which is again tested through the interviews. So yeah, short answer, no, they do not look at the GMAT score.
Thanks, Pravik. It was really insightful. There's another follow-up question that I get asked, so I'm going to, of course, address it here if it's running through anybody's heads. Do MBBs ever go and read your application to see whether you put management consulting as a post-MBA goal or not, or you put something else and then you are sitting in an MBB interview? Is something we get asked. Pravik, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, to be very honest, even if the MBBs wanted to do that, the schools would never allow them to do that. They have a very strict non-disclosure policy, not just about your application essays, but you'll be happy to know even about your grades. So whatever grade you get during your MBA, the MBBs or any of your future employers can never get that information from your schools. So, and the schools have been pretty strict about that.
Yeah. So this question we often get asked because candidates do put something as their post-MBA goal sometimes, which is not like, plans can change, guys, and business schools are happy to have you explore those plans. You may want to say that you want to become a product manager, but eventually you may end up being a brand manager for Spotify or something. I don't know. It does not matter. Nobody's going to go check. So it's okay. All right. Next question, Cyrus, and the last one, because we've been talking about this yesterday when we talked, and the word that you used, it actually caught our attention. So we wanted to talk about it in today's session, something that we are calling smart authenticity. And Cyrus wants to throw some light on it. How to bring smart authenticity in your application, if you can advise our candidates on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, look, the reason I said that is because I think one once you have your resume and your GMAT done, like what makes your essay something that's memorable is if the content is authentic, and it's only authentic if it's truly you. Now, everyone in the world says be you and whatever, but I feel like the reason I added the word smart to it is because you have a clear context here, which is leadership and business school. And so you want to put your authentic self, who you really are, without trying to impress them with too many, look how amazing I am, and or make them cry with too many, like sympathy seeking stories. Like something in the middle that's just who you are, like a normal person, but at the same time geared towards leadership. So smart is because you have a limited number of words in the essay, and you do only those words to show them that you're someone who can be a global leader, someone who can have impact. So I think as a result, the advice I give to my applicants is say everything you have to tell them, like, in an honest and truthful way, and then just focus on things that are focused on you and your leadership career. So perhaps maybe less on your family story, maybe less on high school projects, maybe less on extracurriculars, and more on active things that you're doing in your core that tie to your core long-term goals. But then at the same time, make sure you're authentic and you're not saying things like, I want to save the planet, I want to have impact, like statements like this that don't really show them who you are. They're quite generic. That's what I meant.
Thanks, Cyrus. Pravik, any 2 cents that you'd like to add?
No, I think that makes complete sense. And I think particularly, Cyrus, the point that you mentioned around everything going back to the entire narrative, the long-term story that you're portraying, everything should really if you look back, it should just join the dots to the same story, to the same narrative. So even if, you have an instance that you want to share in your essays, which is more personal in nature, for example, something that happened in your personal life, with your family, with your girlfriend, etc. But if it ties in super well with your long-term goal, if that is actually a motivating factor that drove you towards that long-term career objective, yes, go for it completely. But yeah, I mean, everything at the end should tie in with your long-term goal, be it personal or.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. So I think now it's time we can start tackling questions. Abhinav is asking, I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but I can try to reframe it in what I understand. The difference between US versus Europe 1-year MBA programs. If that's what you're asking, Abhinav, that's what we're going to answer. 1-year program is a 1-year program, unless you want to polish that question or maybe raise your hand and we're happy to have you unmuted. There are just 2 to 3 programs in the US that I am aware of which offer a 1-year MBA, while a lot of European MBA business schools offer a 1-year program, unless, Abhinav, go ahead, unmute yourself. Why don't you ask it yourself?
Yeah, actually, considering my experience, it's like around 10 years. I was going through 1-year options that are available. And so there's a pretty good list that's available. That has Kellogg's, Stern, Cornell, and there's the Marshall, IBM, even Notre Dame and Emory have some 1-year programs. So I was just wondering, as far as these things go and European programs are concerned, and considering that MBAs are more of a US oriented program, right? People do rank the US universities higher, just out of the ranking wise. Not we're not going into the exact curriculum, etc. Just the ranking wise. So how good is it for me to explore those US colleges instead of the European colleges, considering they also have a low GMAT threshold? So I have a 720, but I'll still like to explore these options as well as those European options. I was just asking that.
Okay. Pravik, I'll take a shot and then maybe you can add your thoughts. So with 10 years of experience, Abhinav, I'm going to be honest here. US regular MBA programs are not going to be very welcoming of you, versus depending on like what is the exact reason why you want to go for an MBA, you really need to have a very strong reason for why MBA. While if you will look at the cohorts between US and European regular MBA programs, the average age is slightly higher in European schools versus US schools. There, the average lies for your candidature somewhere between 3 to 5 years. While in Europe, it can really lie between 5 to 7 to 10 to 11. IMD has an average age of 11 years. In CR, also you see people with 7 to 8 years of experience. So you have to also understand what's the objective of going to a business school. You do not want to go to a business school where the peers are much younger than yourself. So you have to, of course, pick a school basis that, while I understand the reason why you want to go for a 1 year versus 2 year program. Second, there is a program that most people are not aware of. Since you mentioned Marshall Iber, there is MIT Sloan Fellow MBA program. The Sloan Fellow MBA program, it has 3 programs listed under it, which is primarily for older candidates or mid-senior level candidates who really want to go back to school, but do not want to go for an executive MBA education. So you can explore MSX at Stanford, which falls under Sloan Fellow MBA programs. Or you can explore LBS. It has a master's in management, strategic management, something like that, which also falls under Sloan Fellow MBA program and MIT Sloan Fellow MBA program. So with a 720, you should be able to apply to all of such programs and you're very much eligible. But if you're really considering regular MBA programs in US, I really want to have a conversation with you to understand that better. And I really advise you to check the average age of the schools that you're targeting. So that's my 2 cents. Pravek, Cyrus, if you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think Pardeep, spot on. I think that was definitely a few points to consider. And I think on top of that, I would just add that geographical angle in terms of, where do you see yourself after the MBA? Do you want to come back to your home country versus do you want to, settle down? So if you do want to settle down in those countries, then of course the entire angle of immigration and, permanent residency comes into the picture. So from that perspective, you also would need to consider your long-term view in terms of, how settled do you want to actually be in that country versus coming back to your home country, which again is a little easier in the Europe as compared to the US, as was also part of my story. So that's another angle on top of what Pardeep mentioned that I would want to add.
Yeah, and if you're really looking to move, then yeah, work visa situations also is something that we should all consider depending where we're coming from. Okay, let's answer another Abhinav's question. In terms of WorkX, what do you see to be an ideal WorkX? Again, Pravek, Cyrus, thoughts?
Well, HBS, I feel like the bulk of people had like 4 to 6 years before school, but you had few people with less. I had 3. One guy had 2, and a few others had like 7 plus. So yeah, I'd say statistically most between 4 and 6 at HBS, a good minority between 6 to 8, and a little minority 8 plus and under 3.
I think you summed that up really well. For Pravek, do you want to add, maybe talk about INSEAD a little bit more focus there?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers, that is pretty spot on. Of course, a little higher when it comes to the European schools in terms of the average. But I'm not sure if this question was geared also towards understanding what are the profiles that are typically coming with the MBA. So if it is actually that question, then yes, there is no ideal profile, firstly. When I was doing the INSEAD MBA, I came across batchmates who were police officers before their MBA, who came directly from the army. There was one person who was a fragrance expert. I didn't even know this existed. So again, of course, but on the other hand, there were also consultants, there were also investment bankers who were coming into the MBA. So there is no ideal job profile that would lead you to an MBA. It's just completely coming back to that point of what is your overarching career objective and how does an MBA fit into that. If you're able to justify that, then there is really no ideal job profile that they're looking for.
Thanks a lot for that. And yes, lately I just came across a yoga trainer who joined INSEAD, I think graduated last year or something. So yeah, no ideal profile, a strong reason for why you want to get an MBA, guys. And number of years also, because we've seen somebody with 12 years of experience get into Colombia after they're serving their term in the Indian Army. We've seen people with 15 years of experience as well. So it really depends the pool that you belong to and why you want to get an MBA and why you want to go back to school. So as long as you know that, I think it's fine. And be authentic, like Cyrus said. They do not despise you for your age. They do not despise you for the industry that you're coming from. They just need to know why you want to do it. Okay, Rishi is checking on what are the odds of getting an admit of two top 20 to 30 ranking USB schools if applying with a GMAT waiver. Pravik, Cyrus, have you worked with any candidate for GMAT waiver or any thoughts on that?
Cyrus,
I have never worked with a GMAT waiver. I don't know.
Okay.
Actually.
I can talk about it because this is the new norm that has come into the picture since the pandemic. And a lot of candidates have applied through the pandemic and after, and they have gotten through. What we learned with business schools after that, and why we're seeing more and more lesser GMAT and GRE scores getting through to top schools, is actually after business schools opening up their heart to know GMAT scores. To be honest, they realized that they were actually letting so many interesting profiles in, and they were missing out on them because they were really putting so much emphasis on business school for the GMAT scores just to get you through to some of the top schools. So yes, we've seen, but there are going to be the criteria that schools have laid out that you may need to pass through. For example, TUC, I'm 100% aware of. They are still looking for either some certifications. You need to prove that you have a CFA or some kind of something to prove that yes, you are really smart quant wise. While other schools like Ross, they never asked for any supplemental information. They were just okay, you putting in a reason and maybe providing some like your job case scenarios where you have tackled difficult situations, which showcase you as a good critical reasoning person and a good aptitude wise sorted person. So just check the criteria and just check for which schools are really still offering it, because not all schools are offering it anymore. And even if they're not offering it, don't be hesitant to reach out to them and ask if you can apply with a waiver if there is a genuine reason for you to go ahead and submit your application without GMAT. So that's my 2 cents. All right, now, is there a desirable age for candidates selected, primarily females? I think we already answered that question. There is none, but you should pick the right program that fits you. And my advice would be where you are going to learn from your peers. So depending on that, you can choose Europe versus US as a geography, 1 year versus 2 year programs, or programs like Sloan Fellow MBA, Marshall Iber, depending on what you really want to accomplish with the program. Okay, let's talk about Tahir's question, and maybe Pravik, Cyrus, you can help me answer this. I have a very general profile. So how hard it could be for me to get into, and what can one do to stand out? So again, a very generic question. Tahir, unless Pravik, Cyrus, you want to add something, maybe your thoughts, or Tahir, feel free to go unmute yourself as well.
Yeah, I think I would actually want to see if Tahir, you want to unmute yourself to just put some more color into the question. Otherwise, I'm happy to go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm actually an engineer, so I'm working in a software company, product-based company. So I think that I have a very general profile when it comes to India, where everyone has a good GRE, GMAT score, and they all have engineers profile, right? So I wanted to know like how could I stand out from them? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. So I understand, there's definitely this entire notion around having a generic profile. Say if you're an Indian engineer, a male Indian engineer, there's definitely, this aspect of increased competition when you feel that you're coming from a generic profile. But again, the way you can actually make your profile stand out is by focusing on the other elements, such as extracurriculars, such as the international experience, such as awards and recognition that you might have gotten, both personal and professional. These are, a single applicant has a lot of elements, not just your professional experience and the country that you come from, and you can use these elements to kind of make your profile really stand out a lot. And I think the biggest element of all of these is your entire short-term, long-term goal and your overarching career objective. Because again, even if you are currently, say, as you mentioned, a software engineer working in India, you might not want to continue in the technology domain, in the future, not want to be a software engineer. And you might actually want to do something which is in itself something very unique. And maybe your personal experiences when you introspect kind of tie in very closely with that long-term goal. On top of that, add your extracurriculars. On top of that, add your international experience. All of that put together will make sure that you don't have a generic profile. And to be honest, every profile that applies to any MBA business school out there is different in its own way, even if professionally it is very similar. So, and that is exactly what the admission committee, it is their full-time job to really dive deep into the nitty-gritties of each applicant and understand them from a holistic perspective. So it's not just about your professional background, but it really is a combination of all of these elements put together.
Yeah, I could not agree more with Praveg.
Yeah, thanks, Praveg, for that. I would not like to add anything. I think you summed it up really well. Ritvik is checking, and I'm assuming the question says, is it possible to move to UK after you finish your OPT in the US after an MBA? I've seen a bunch of my friends, you can move, if that's what the question is asking. Yes, you can move across countries. Even after an MBA, you can move. Unless, Ritvik, you want to unmute yourself, ask that question again, if I did not get
Yeah,
it
the
right.
concern was after the OPT visa finishes up and we have gone on a dry run in US, how to switch to a higher economy like UK.
Yeah, people move geographies all the time. Even during OPT, if you want to switch countries, if you see that there is an opportunity for you to, which is better than what you're getting in the US, you can move. And there's no obligation, I believe, in your OPT to stay back. Unless, Cyrus, Praveg, you have any other thoughts or ideas on that?
Well, I wasn't clear about the question. Is it like, can you stay after school?
So the question is that, can you move after you finish your OPT, that you get to three year stay back thingy in the US after MBA?
Can you move back home?
Yeah, or home or anywhere, any other country.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they're not forcing you to stay. But if you want to stay in the US, you have 3 years, each of the 3 years of your OPT to apply for the H-1B. The 3-year is only applicable if you take STEM courses during your MBA, such that your OPT becomes STEM, and it's renewable every year. So you still are at risk of not doing all 3 years, just to be clear. But in theory, most of the time, in practice, most people who do the OPT STEM, I believe you're able to stay all 3 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to go home,
or anywhere for that matter.
Yeah, anywhere else is fine. I think they're not. I think they're fine.
Yeah, Ritvik, you're raising your hand, so we'd love to clarify if there's something else remaining.
Yeah. I would like Praveg's perspective on this, since he chose UK over US. Okay, so the reason is similar for all the Indians, because the economics of scale when taking a loan of 2 crore rupees for US MBA, let's say without a scholarship, how do a person manages if the H-1B1 visa thing does not work out, or the L1 visa wing doesn't work out after 3 years of staying in US and still having some loan left in dollars?
Yep. So, Ritvik, these were the questions that I was asking myself when I was contemplating which MBA program, which country should I be, targeting, and primarily because of the entire immigration concept or the immigration laws that the US has currently with this renewable, H-1B visa over 3 years. I personally did not feel very comfortable because of the reason that you mentioned, that what if I need to go back to my home country? How will I, ever pay back my loan? And that was the primary reason why I really shifted to European schools, because that kind of gave me that mental peace that, okay, even after graduating, I will have a lot of options within Europe and even in the UK where I can find a job, continue to work there. And there is a definite pathway towards citizenship or at least permanent residency, which of course gave me a lot of, a peace, a mental peace that I don't need to really worry or take a lot of stress around immigration after I graduate from the MBA, and I can very easily pay off the loan. So based on these factors, I decided on the UK and not the US. But again, this is a question which is very personal in nature. So it really depends on your personal situation, circumstances, and what are your objectives overall from the MBA. That will help you decide whether or not the US or the UK is the right country for you.
Absolutely. So we've just got like a minute left, and Ritwik, I'd be happy to talk about this at length. We've seen people having their H-1B getting rejected 3 times in less than 3 years, like Cyrus mentioned. And we've also seen people moving countries, let's say from European business schools after having worked in UK for a year or 2 years, then moving to US. So what's the larger objective looking at the economic situation of the world right now? Everything is dicey. I think we should all hedge our bets across different geographies. That's how I like to wrap it up when I'm to apply to different business schools. There are a bunch of questions that are still remaining. And guys, we always try to answer as many as possible. I'm going to send out an email to you. Please copy paste your question, send it across to me. I'll try to reply to you on the same email thread, or I'm happy to get on a call with you afterwards during the week. Thanks everyone for joining in today, and thanks Praveg and Cyrus for making this a wonderful, insightful session.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.